Welcome to the Bible Forum. I'm Warren Sprouse. It's Sunday night and we're together. I want to talk to you a little bit about Michael Moore. Michael Moore met with the Pope, he says, recently. Michael Moore is a liberal. He's a filmmaker. He was on Seth Meyers' show, Late Night, they call it. And he said that he asked the Pope about income equality. Here's what he said. I went to the weekly audience with the Pope, and then he asked to speak to me privately. Keep in mind, nobody knows whether this is true or not. It's Michael Moore. It could be, it may not be. He says it was an amazing moment, and the Pope asked if I, Michael Moore, could ask him a question. Now I take that back. Michael asked if he could ask the Pope a question. The Pope said yes. So Michael asked the question, do you believe that an economic system that benefits the few, the wealthy, at the expense of the many, is a sin? That's the way he defines capitalism. That's how he sees it. It's not really the way it is. But here's where the story gets a little weird. Because of all the questions, a Catholic, and I'm assuming Moore's a Catholic, I don't know why he'd go see the Pope if he wasn't. Of all the questions a Catholic could ask the Pope, he asked him about capitalism. But then I think, yeah, it's Michael Moore, so I guess it's possible. But still, in a real world, this would not be the question anyone would ask the Pope. Anyway, Moore says that in asking the question, the Pope responded in Italian, saying, "Si." Again, it's me, being picky. But I wonder why an Argentine would respond to an English-speaking person in Italian, except if they are in Italy. But that's not his native language. And why would they choose any of that over English, since you're talking to someone who may not understand anything else? I don't know. Makes the story just a little bit more weird. So Moore says, quote, "So you believe capitalism, the capitalism we now have, is sin?" And the Pope says, yes, it is. Because the poor must always come first. And then the Pope grabbed Michael's hand and said, "Please pray for me." And Michael said, "I will. And please you pray for me." And the Pope says, "No. You have more movies to make. Make more movies." And Moore says, I'm like, "I just wanted a prayer." And he's like, "No, you go back. Go back and go back to work." So Michael Moore has concluded that the Pope has a sense of humor. Now keep in mind, all this took place on a late-night TV comedy show. So we don't really expect an intellectually based conversation at that hour of the night. And it's Michael Moore, a strident leftist. But think about the logic. Capitalism, people, corporations working to make a profit. Profit is the money that you use not just to live your life, but profit is the money you have in order to help poor people if that's what you wanted to do. You don't make a profit, the poor people get no help. The more profits, the greater help you can be. You meaning the population at large. Now that's theoretical. I mean, that's just the logic of it. But even at its worst, only a capitalistic system can ever help the poor indefinitely. Think Venezuela. Think Colombia. where people are risking their lives to leave. Think of the economies around the world where people have nothing. What do they have to give? You say, well, they're poor. They don't give, they get. But they're all poor. I looked it up. The best economy in the world is Switzerland, with the United States coming in number 2. And you have to say, why is our economy number 2? Well, our economy is much, much larger. And our debt as a percentage of GDP is also much larger. Switzerland has a debt as a percentage of GDP that's 43.6%. We here in the United States, our debt is 105%. We owe more than we make. We owe more than we have by 5%. But we're not the worst economy in the world. We're number 2 of the best. Yemen is the worst economy in the world. They are currently in the midst of a civil war. They are on the brink of a famine. The next 8 nations working backward toward top 10, are all African, with Haiti being number 10. Capitalism as a monetary system is about privately or corporately owned production, with development as a proportion of reinvestment into a free market system. The Pope's home country of Argentina ranks number 26 out of the 32 nations that make up the Western Hemisphere. One of the poorest nations in the Western world, Western Hemisphere. And he, an Argentine, is telling a committed leftist what to do. The answer to the world's economic problems? An emphasis on personal responsibility, something that communism never does. Help those who cannot help themselves. Let the markets help all the rest. Now, that's assuming the markets have the freedom to operate without government interference and or pressures. When you help people who can work, could make money, won't, you are actually harming that person. You are conditioning them to expect others to take care of them. If you leave people who can work, do for themselves, leave them to their own devices, they ultimately will. Why? They'll get hungry. They'll do something. Yeah, they'll start stealing. Well, then we'll put them in jail. It'll get worse. They'll learn sooner or later. Well, what if they don't learn? Well, there are incorrigible people. There are also people who haven't got a brain and cell in their body. Very small percentage of the people you run into. There are exceptions. There are people who are very industrious, very smart, and who will turn to crime rather than work. But we will just find them, arrest them, and we will put them to work. And if they don't want to work in prison, then they don't eat. They'll do anything if they don't work. And sooner or later, they'll work. That sounds terrible. It's a Bible idea. A man that won't work shouldn't eat. You shouldn't feed somebody who won't work. the law of nature will take over. If you don't eat, you'll die. See, we can't let people die. They won't die. That's just the excuse people use. The excuse that liberals use to take productive citizens' wealth away from them to give to people who could work but won't. Notice I say could. There's people that can. Anybody would help those people. This is a system that is confiscatory. It's taking. I don't have any choice. And a system that takes without choice isn't a moral system. And a lot of what we do is out of our emotion, out of our sense of guilt. We have to help these people. But it isn't helpful. And it's demonstrating itself all the time. God's system is an entirely different animal. In God's system, we understand, because God tells us, that human beings, by nature, have an innate deficiency. They're selfish. Selfishness is due to our sin nature. We were born that way. And unless we are trained, motivated in another, we will gravitate into greater sin. Now, human beings cannot help from being human. It's a moral deficiency. And that's why God came to earth as a man, paying the price for that sin, providing mankind with a moral choice to know right versus wrong, to see the stark realities, and also to provide mankind with power to do right. It's called grace. But what is right? In terms of our discussion, which is economies, right is working in order to provide for yourself and your family. God said in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, if a man won't work, neither should he eat. Don't feed somebody that won't work. Why? Because sin created a moral economic system whereby human beings are required to work if they want to eat. It wasn't like that in the beginning. Adam and Eve lived in a paradise. You just go pick the fruit. It was sin that created the system we're in now, where you have to work by the sweat of your brow to get the earth to produce so that you can live. The liberal, the humanistic, the socialistic system that encourages people not to work not only doesn't work, it bankrupts nations. And as such, it is a sin against God. So here we have a man telling a comedian on a comedy show that the supreme leader of the largest so-called Christian religion of the world told him that God's program is sin. And given Michael Moore's political orientation, that socialism is the answer. So you ask, how much of your millions, Mr. Moore, have you given to people in your neighborhood who won't work? Or people in your purview, people in your world. These people refuse to work. So how many millions of dollars have you given to that program to help them stay in that situation? Well, I looked to see what kind of giving Michael Moore does, and it's public knowledge. He gives money to help people. One website lists adoption, fostering children, orphans, AIDS, and HIV. He gives to children, to education, to health programs and poverty programs, and weapons reduction. But the only charity he seems to actually support with money is something called simply Malawi. Malawi. It's an organization that helps orphans in Malawi. They provide water, food, medical care, and schooling. As best I can ascertain, the other charitable efforts are public appearances and celebrity announcements. Michael Moore has the opportunity to hire working class people and minorities for his various projects. However, the website newsofinterest.tv reports that he rarely does. Not for the high-level jobs. Not for jobs that actually pay good salaries. Here he hires entertainment industry veterans with previous high-level experience. End of quote. Now keep in mind, that's smart. It's just not consistent with his rhetoric and public persona. A public persona which is largely bogus. He has been found to exaggerate his foundation's donations, giving only the minimum amounts. He funded environmental projects near property he owned, which therefore improved his property values. Now, I happen to think that's smart, but it's certainly not politically correct, which would then paint Michael Moore as a hypocrite. In his own book entitled Downsize This, Moore claims that every business, including his own, should always involve labor unions. However, he is known to dissuade employees from joining unions, not giving writers proper credit, and moving film production out of the country to save on production costs. Now, it's explained that Moore is well known for being obsessed with money. I got it. I'm not giving it to just anybody. In 2014, his wife of 23 years filed for divorce. The filings listed, quote, multiple substantial residences and multiple companies, end of quote, as assets. One was what is being called the Northern Michigan Mansion. Pictures of it resemble a luxury hotel rather than a home for two people. This man of the people has lived the life of a one-percenter as long as he's been on this planet. And this is the man who wants the nation to embrace communism. Socialism, as if we could tell the difference. Were we to do this, doesn't he realize his mansions would be at risk? He couldn't have these things. Now, he could have been using his wealth to create jobs for all those he views as victims of immoral capitalism. But he hasn't. He didn't. He doesn't. And without capitalism, Michael Moore would be just as poor as everybody else. Without capitalism, there is no money for the poor. Now, there are legitimate poor. These are people who cannot. But we have a world full of deliberate poor. These are people who will not. They don't have to. Mom and dad took care of them. Their friends will take care of them. For the guys, they'll find girlfriends that'll take care of them. And when all else fails, the government will take care of them. The deliberate poor tend to remain so. And they remain this way largely because of liberalism's need for victims. It's almost deliberate on the part of the socialists in our political system. Michael Moore, I think he's lying. I don't think the Pope said anything like it. Do you?